What is going on, everyone? Anthony Drew Gary here, host of the How To Show, where we talk about optimizing life, money, and happiness one how to at a time. At the beginning of the year, I had a number of videos that I planned to record and release around the topic of saving for retirement. And throughout the first half of 2020, it just didn't seem appropriate to release some of those at the time. But the more I think about it, the more I basically realize that it's important information. And if there are folks who may not know a whole lot about the different steps that they have or the different options that they have available to them in going about how to save for retirement, and just to generally have an opportunity to speak on those topics, to give some attention to something that is important, I decided that we're gonna start doing those. We're gonna sprinkle them in here and there. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is specific to folks who have a W-2 job and have an opportunity to invest or save money for retirement in a 401k plan. And so this is a video on how to become vested in your 401k. We're going to talk about what that means. And thankfully, you really don't have to do anything specific to be vested, but I want to explain what it means and relative to an employer match, why it's important to you and why you need to know how the rules work, because it doesn't work the same for everyone. And so if you know the rules, you can generally play the game better, and that transcends retirement into just general ideas about life. But to do a deeper dive into this video, I need to give some context to it. And so I'm going to switch over to Zoom so I can share my screen, and we'll talk about what it means to be vested in a 401k. So to set up this idea, we need to have a case study, or at least some parameters to really dive through this and understand what it means on a year-to-year basis for somebody that's employed by an employer who offers a 401k. And so for our example, we're going to talk about somebody who's making $50,000 a year as their starting salary. And for the sake of the discussion, we are going to assume that they're eligible for 3% cost of living increases that happen once a year. And so the employer match for this person for their 401k contributions is going to be 3%. And so what that means is that if an employee is contributing 3% of their income to retirement, the company will match that. And this is where you need to start paying attention to what your company offers, because all companies will do this slightly different. I've seen companies that offer as low as a 1% match. I've seen companies that offer as much as a 10% match. And so this is something that's going to vary from company to company. And so it's important to know this ahead of time and just know how the rules work for the company that you're looking to go and work for. And so when we start to look at this, we've got a 3% employee match. And so that 3% in that first year is worth 3% of $50,000. And so that's $1,500. And so as an employee, you have to contribute 3% in order to get that 3% match. But by no means does that stop you from contributing more than 3%. In fact, it's probably a good idea to do so. As of the time of this video, you can contribute as much as $19,500 to a 401k in any given year. But for the sake of simplicity and the way that we're going to talk about 401k vesting, we need to assume that you're hitting the minimum contribution so that you can get the match from that company. So when we look at this, we're really only looking at the match so that we can compare the match apples to apples across different years. And so that $1,500 that the company threw in, let's assume that money makes 8% returns per year. It's invested in mutual funds, or it's invested in something that's giving a rate of return. So 8% of that $1,500 is $120. And so that means that the total match value for that year is worth $1,620. And then we've got a couple of additional rows that talk about the vested value and the total lost if you leave. And what does that mean? That means that the way that most 401k matches work is set up on a vestige schedule. And so that means that at different thresholds of time for your tenure with a company, the amount of the match that you get to keep also changes. And so the vestige schedule for our example is shown in rows 12 through 18. And so if you're with the company 0 to 1 years, you don't get to keep any of it. If you're with the company 1 to 3 years, you get to keep some. You're with the company 4 years, you get to keep more, 5 years more, 6 years more. And at this company, once you've been with the company for 7 years, you get to keep all of the 401k matches that they've identified for you throughout the years that you've been working there. So again, I want to explain that this is not the same for every company. There will be some companies where you're fully vested, and that's the typical term for what this is called. When you get 100% of the match, that's called fully vested, and some companies will do this in as quickly as 5 years. There are some companies that are even really generous, and you're fully vested in your 401k from day one that you become eligible to contribute to one. So it's important to know how this works when you're negotiating with employers, especially if you're trying to compare maybe two opportunities, apples to apples. So, people talk about you always want to contribute to your 401k to get the company match because it's basically giving yourself free money or giving yourself a raise. And that's kind of true, but you need to understand how the vestige schedule works because it's not always guaranteed. And so for this example, somebody who's only been with the company 1 year has 0% vested. And so that means that if they were to leave the company in less than 1 year, they would not get to keep any of that money that the company has thrown in as a match. So let's assume that this employee makes it to year 2, and so we'll start to look at the scenario again. So year 2, they were able to get that annual bump, and so their salary is higher, but the employee match is still the same. So the employer is matching a little bit more than they did the year before, but you also have the value of last year's match plus last year's growth, and compounding that, all of that money is going to make 8% again. That's just a general rule. Some years it might make 4, some years it might make 12, but let's just use an average for the sake of the discussion. So you go down a little further, and so the total the total match value for somebody that's been with the company 2 years is worth basically $3,400. But since they've been with the company over a year, they get to keep 20% of that if they ever left. So 683 is good for good, no matter what, even if you decide to leave after 2 years. But this is where you start to see that the number that you would lose in your 401k starts to increase a little bit as the years go on. And this is maybe you've heard of the concept of golden handcuffs. Maybe a company has an employee in a position where if they were to leave the company, they would lose out on something important to them. And so this is a scenario here where if that person were to leave this company, they would leave $2,700 on the table that they wouldn't get to take with them out of their 401k account. And so let's go ahead and move on to year 3, where the same sorts of things happen. They got the annual raise again, they got the employer match, the returns are compounding. And so the total value of the match after 3 years is worth $5,400. But again, because the way that the vestige schedule works, it's still at that 20% mark. So they're only going to get to keep $1,082. And so that total loss that left is now over $4,000. And so it starts to become a discussion point on, it's not out of the question. Somebody in these years 3, 4, or 5, they may be exposed to a new opportunity, a chance to go and work for a different company, or maybe a chance to stay home and just a change in lifestyle. All of these things are possible. And so this is something that's really not looked at as an opportunity cost of leaving a company. And so let's go ahead and extrapolate that out 1 more year to year 4. You get the bump again. You get all of the same sorts of numbers going on here. The match goes up. The total return is greater than it was the year before. But again, the the total lost if left is still continuing to go up a little bit, even though in year 4 you go to a different percentage vested. And so you'll see the total vested value from years 3 to 4 has gone up a good amount. And so just to think about this, you're potentially leaving almost $4,600 on the table if you leave. But that's not to say that it's not worth making a change. It's a good opportunity, or a good possibility, if you're looking to make a change after 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, that the pros and cons may say that maybe it's worth walking away from this percentage of your 401k that you wouldn't get to take with you. So we'll continue on this, and so they get the bump again, and the total match value continues to go up, but the total vested value throughout these later years, these numbers are getting bigger. First you got to keep 20%, then you got to keep 40%. Now you're getting to keep 60%. So that you can basically see that's 6 out of 10 here. And so you get to keep the $6,000. You would still have to give back the $4,000. But as you can tell, the years go by, and the number that you would lose out of your vested portion starts to get lower and lower. So we'll go to year 6 just to continue this going out. At year 6, you get to keep 80% of your vested amount. And so of the 12,000 and change, you're getting to keep 10 of it. And we'll extrapolate it 1 year further so that, you're still getting the bump, you're still getting the match. But at this point, the match has been compounded over 7 years, plus all of the contributions from the employer, worth roughly $16,000, and you get to keep all of it because you have made it to the point in your company's Vestige Schedule that you are 100% vested in that 401k. So to tie all of this up, it's just important to know that even though there are folks that'll say that that's a dollar for dollar match or a dollar for dollar raise, and it's free money that you would be leaving on the table, that's true, but it's not free money at the time that which it goes in, because the employers through these vestige schedules still have an opportunity to claw that money back in the event that you leave. So it's important to know the rules here. Again, these companies that offer 401k matches don't all work on a 7-year schedule. Some are better. I've not personally seen any that are longer than 7 years, but it's a question that you need to ask to make sure that you understand it on the front end of things. So we'll switch back over to me full screen now. That is going to bring this episode of the show to a close. Hopefully there was some actionable things that you can learn and take away. And if you already knew these things, but maybe you know somebody who needs to learn them or dust off the information, please share the video with them. Knowledge is power when it comes to these types of things, and there's no downside to everybody knowing about it. So if you liked this video, hit the like button so that the YouTube algorithm knows that it's a video that somebody else should watch as well. And if you haven't already, smash the subscribe button so that you can be the first to know about new videos when they come out. They're still coming out every Wednesday, and that's not stopping anytime soon. If you have some feedback for this episode, or you just want to engage with me through the comment section, please leave a comment. I respond to all of those, have fun doing it. And if you have an idea for a future topic for the show, that's a great way to tell me about that as well. That'll be it for this episode of the How To Show. This is Anthony Drew Gary, your host, signing off.